I was talking just a couple days ago to a good friend of mine from India who does a lot of restoration work, a lot of physical restoration work. And she does beautiful, wonderful work. And she and a whole bunch of others, I don't remember the number, if it was 15,000 or 150,000. It has to be 15,000 because it was just in a few days. They took out, her and a few others, took out 15,000 invasive pine trees in the area where they were to restore some grass, help restore some grasslands. And it's beautiful, wonderful work, but wouldn't it be nice if the world was actually being restored as opposed to that being this much, and at the same time there are mines going in a half mile away that are destroying 1,000 times as much? And I want to live in a world being restored. I want to live in a world where the carbon is actually going down, the atmospheric carbon is actually going down, which, by the way, even not getting rid of industrialization, which we'll talk about in a while, for the next 2 hours, but even not getting rid of that, the United States could become a carbon sink very easily. All they'd have to do is restore all prairie and forest east of the Mississippi River, and they could maintain industrialism. That's how much the world wants to live. Is when they talk about, it's like several years ago, Richard Branson, is that the guy's name? Virgin Airlines? Branson, is that it? Branson. He put out this thing saying that he would give, I don't know, $1 million or something to anybody who could figure out some device that would sequester carbon and be cost-effective and environmentally safe and everything. And yeah, exactly. You're going to steal my idea. And I wrote him a letter that said, trees, you can send the check to. I didn't hear back. And so anyway, part of the reason we lose is because I don't think a lot of us really know what we want. And then another part of the reason we lose is because, as environmentalists, we lose is because how many people in here have read Robert J. Lifton's great book, The Nazi Doctors? A fabulous, fabulous book. In this book, he takes, it's one of the probably 20 most important books I've ever read. And in this book, he takes, his basic idea is that he wanted to ask the question, how is it that men in this case, who had taken the Hippocratic Oath, could go work in a death camp? How could they do that? And what he found is that there were some like Mengele who were just horrible sadists, and we'll put them aside. And but he said that most of them actually cared very deeply for the health of the inmates, and they would do whatever they could to help them. They would, if they were in pain, they would give them an aspirin to lick. They would hide them from selection officers who were going to kill them. They would put them to bed for a day or two. They would, did I mention that they'd give them a scrap of potato to eat if they're starving, which they were always starving? They would do everything they could except for the most important thing of all, which is they wouldn't question the existence of the death camp itself. They wouldn't question the larger superstructure that was causing it. And as environmentalists, we, and I include myself, do the same thing. We do everything we can to save this or that creature we love, or this or that piece of ground that we love. We do everything we can except for the most important thing of all, which is to question the larger superstructure that is working the planet to death, that is gassing the planet to death. And that's not good enough. It's not good enough for me for a few more generations of bobcat or salmon or lampreys to live out harried lives before they ultimately get exterminated. You know, a metaphor I think about, or an analogy or whatever the hell it is, that I think about all the time is that every year my mom gets a couple cords of firewood, which then gets stacked in her garage, and then I carry firewood in for her every day in the winter into the house. And every day I pick up a piece of firewood and I look at it for spiders, and then I knock them off on the rest of the pile. But I am fully aware, so I don't burn them to death, and I am fully aware as I'm doing this that I am merely putting off their execution date, because eventually she goes through the whole pile. And it's the same. You know, we were talking last night about a really good book called Gunfighter Nation by Richard Slotkin, which is, the basic idea is that he follows popular fiction from 1780 through 1980 or something. And the basic idea is how, in this popular fiction, in the 1780s, the popular fiction would be about how white people want to fight fair against the Indians, but the Indians they never fight fair, which means just this once the white people have to fight dirty. And in the 1930s, it was that the white people want to fight fair, United States people want to fight fair, but the Mexicans fight dirty. So just this once, the white people have to fight dirty. 1870s, American Indians fight dirty, so just this once, the white people got to fight dirty. 1900, white people want to fight fair. The Filipinos, they fight dirty, so just this once, we got to fight dirty. Which didn't happen in the Civil War, didn't happen in World War I, because it's white people. Didn't happen in World War II, it happened with the Japanese with popular fiction, didn't happen with the Germans so much. And 1970s, 1960s, and early 70s, you know, United States always wants to fight fair, but those goddamn Vietnamese, you know, they fight dirty. So just this once, we got to fight dirty. And this is true with cop movies, too. You know, it's like Dirty Harry. Dirty Harry wants to be clean, but those fucking bad guys, they fight dirty. So just this once, Dirty Harry's got to fight dirty. And I don't know, have we heard this rhetoric lately about how, you know, the United States does not want to torture, but those fucking Arabs, you know, they fight dirty. So just this once, we got to fight dirty. And this is also the classic line of abusers. It's this exceptionalism. And it's never a pattern. That's the thing. There's a great line by Mellon Kundera, which is the struggle against oppression is the struggle of memory against forgetting. The struggle against oppression is the struggle of memory against forgetting. Because if the abusers can make you not recognize the pattern, you can say, okay, it's okay. They can put in the Keystone XL. They're not going to do anything else. Okay, they can put in one more oil well. They can't do anything else. Oh, the BLM is fucking up Desolation Canyon in Utah. Well, that's okay. It's the last one, you know. Just this once, they got to make an exception to environmental rules, you know. But it's consistent. Anyway, so everything is about us. Everything in an abusive system is aimed toward people not seeing the pattern. You know, I don't know about you, but it's so funny. I was talking about this yesterday, and you were kind of laughing, I hope with me, that when I read Chomsky, I was like, seriously, United States is an imperial power? Really? I mean, you know, Chomsky, there are a lot of bad things that Chomsky could probably do. I'm not saying he does, but he could do a lot of bad things just because he taught me that. You know, it's like he gains a lot of cred for that. It's like, and I can't believe I was so stupid. It took me until I was like older than you. It took me until I was like 29 or something to figure out the U.S. is an imperial power. I'm not always very smart. Okay, anyway, so the next question, you know, why do we lose? Another question always is, and this is a question that underlies a lot of my work, is do you believe the culture is going to undergo a voluntary transformation to a sane and sustainable way of living? No. Nobody ever says yes. A lot of people laugh. And the question becomes, if you don't believe the culture is going to undergo a voluntary transformation to a sane and sustainable way of living, what does that mean for your strategy and for your tactics? And the answer is we don't know. And the reason we don't know is because we don't talk about it. And the reason we don't talk about it is because we're all so busy pretending that we have hope. And hope later. It's one of my favorite things to do. And but in any case, it's a huge important question that we need to ask, that we're not asking. Okay, so what I want to do for the rest of the Endgame talk is to go through some of the premises of Endgame. One of the things I did with Endgame is I laid out the premises before I began the book. And one of the reasons I did that is because sort of one of the first rules of propaganda is if you can slide your premises by people, you've got them. I didn't want to do that. What I mean by this is Hitler's a great example. That one of the things Hitler asked was, what are we going to do about the Jewish problem? And a lot of people responded, gosh, Adolf, that's a really good question. What are we going to do about the Jewish problem? But what he's done is he's slid by the premise that there was a Jewish problem they had to do something about. But of course that was a long time ago and people don't do that anymore. Except, for example, like if you hear some talking head on television saying, how can we make the U.S. economy grow? Good question. How can we make the U.S. economy grow? Well, premise one, we want the U.S. economy to grow. Premise two, we want the U.S. economy to exist. Premise three, who the hell's we? And so I don't want to slide the premises by you like that. So I'm gonna lay out some of them as clearly as I can. So the first premise is that industrial civilization is not and can never be sustainable. Industrial civilization is not and can never be sustainable. Several years ago, I was riding around in a car with a friend of mine, George Draffin, and I was just making conversation. I said, so George, if you could live at any level of technology that you wanted, what would it be? And George was not in a very good mood that day, and he said, Derrick, that's a really stupid question. Thank you, George. This is why we're not going to write very many more books together. Anyway, he said that's a really stupid question, because we can fantasize whatever we want, but the only level of technology that's ever been sustainable is the Stone Age. And we will be living again at the Stone Age someday, and the only question is what's left of the world when we get there. And he's right. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that any way of living that's based on the use of non-renewable resources won't last. In fact, I would say it takes anybody but a rocket scientist to figure that out. So if you have basically, if you have 1,000 units of something, and then you use them and you base your way of life on them, and then you have 900, and then you have 800, and then 700, eventually you're going to run out. And you would think that if you have an entire way of life that's based on the use of, I don't know, let's take a random example, oil, that you would ask yourself what you're going to do when the oil runs out. And it's not just oil, it's rare earths, it's zinc, it's aluminum, it's Richard Heinberg wrote a very good book called Peak Everything. And so if you have, which it's not merely oil that is being used up. Sometimes people ask, so what would it take for everyone in the world to live at a United States standard of living? Well, 9 more Earths, or 32 more Earths, or something. I mean, it's like, it's not merely oil that makes that not possible. It's also aluminum. Bauxite. It's also many other copper. It's many other materials that would not. I mean, it's embarrassing that I have to sit here and say that any way of life based on the use of non-renewable resources won't last. I mean, it embarrasses me to even say that. Okay, the first thing. But I'm going to take it a step further, which is, in addition, any way of life that is based on the hyper-exploitation of renewable resources won't last. If every year there are fewer salmon returned than the year before, eventually there will be none. And anybody who is not head of the National Marine Fisheries Services can understand this. That's a joke that works better in the Northwest. So if this year there's 1,000 salmon, or if this year there's 100, it's like up in the Fraser River. I just read this a few days ago. A couple years ago was a great run of salmon for the Fraser River, and it was, I believe, 3 million fish. Might have been 30 million. I don't know. It was a lot of fish, and that sounds wonderful until you actually read what the runs were 100 years ago, which was more than 100 million fish. And so this fabulous run was, I believe, 3% of what the historical runs were. There were runs of salmon. I just read this not very long ago. Even in the 1930s, there was a run of salmon in Alaska that was 12 miles wide and lasted for 30 days. And so once again, if there are fewer passenger pigeons return, eventually there'll be none. For a way of life to be sustainable, you have to not be harming the land base. Where I live now is occupied Tolowa land, Tolowa Indians. And the Tolowa lived there for 12,500 years, if you believe in the myths of science. And if you believe in the myths of the Tolowa, then they lived there since the beginning of time. But in either case, they lived there for a really long time. And they did so sustainably. I was doing a talk at Princeton several years ago. It's pretty funny. Doing a talk at Princeton, and I said this thing about the Tolowa. And this one guy said, just because they lived there for 12,500 years does not mean that they were living there sustainably. I said, okay. Why? And he said, well, because we don't have any quantitative analysis that shows that there's the same number of salmon now as there were 12,500 years ago. I said, you're a science major, aren't you?